I'm excited that you're all here to tune in for an old friend of mine, an amazing musician, an amazing bass player, artist, storyteller, humanitarian, and super funny guy. Um, and you may know about him, but he's a solo bass player. He was with Apple Hill, which is where I met him, and has now toured the world telling stories through music and playing Bach for people who need it the most. So people who are in prison or in Iraq or Afghanistan or Uganda. And he has a nonprofit that they started called Bach with Verse. And I just want to introduce him and have him tell you all about what he does. Thanks for being here. And hey, Dobbs, welcome.
Hey, Peter. Hi. Thanks for having me.
Definitely. Great to have you here. So
Well, I
maybe,
thought,
yeah, go
go
ahead
ahead.
and
Oh, go
tell us
ahead.
a little
Go
bit
ahead.
about yourself.
No, I'll go ahead. Yeah, I thought I would just sort of tell the story, uh, how I ended up where I am now. Not the part about the COVID-19, but the other part. Where I was, say, in January. And I know it's something that musicians, classical musicians, have struggled with for a long time now, is how do you how do you make a career in a time when classical music has whatever 0.001% of the world's population as serious listeners and concert goers? It's something that you can't help but confront. And a lot of people have tried, very few successfully, to be the 19th century virtuoso and go from city to city, playing for packed halls, making lots of money. But it doesn't work for many. So I came out of Juilliard, went to South America for 6 years, where ironically, one of the first things I did, I was in the Peace Corps in Bolivia, and I went out to the Altiplano with some other musicians and played concerts in little villages surrounding Lake Titicaca. And that was great. I thought it was really fun, and never imagined that that was what my life would end up being like. So I was there for 3 years, and I went to Costa Rica for 3 years, and I came back to the United States, and I played with the Apple Hill Chamber Players for 30 years. And that was great. And we did some outreach concerts. And somewhere along the line, let me go back. When I got out of Juilliard, I had bought the book, The Six Bach Suites. And I was obsessively practicing them on the bass, and they're not written for the bass. And mostly they sound terrible on the bass. But I kept struggling and struggling, and somewhere around 1980, I started experimenting with not changing the music, but changing the instrument, and I retuned the bass completely. I put a high C string on, so it'd be C, G, then I tuned the D string down to a C, which gave me the two bottom strings on a cello, and an extra string as a drone that I could tune to whatever I wanted. And at that point, it became possible to play the suites, not so it sounds like it's on a cello, but it sounds like it could have been written for the bass. So I wanted to be able to perform those, and I started doing mostly children's concerts. It's not enough. You can't go out and play, 20-minute suite. And you can't, unless you have the right audience, you can't go out and play all six of them. So that's weird coincidences that probably my closest old friend, who I went to school with at at Oberlin before I even got to Juilliard was John Deek. And John had become a composer during the time I was in Latin America. So I was doing, I did 2 debut recitals. I don't know why I had to do 2, but I did. For the second one, I asked John to write a piece. It was called The Ugly Duckling, from the Hans Christian Andersen story. And it involved a little bit of theater. Something I had never done. Since 5th grade, I was in a production of Scarecrow Sam, but other than that, nothing. But I liked it, and people laughed, and I liked that too. And so I asked John if he wouldn't write another piece, and he wrote a piece for the Apple Hill Chamber Players called Lucy and the Count, which I did the text for, and the bass was the Count. That was really fun. So I began, for the next few years, going from composer's house to composer's house of my friends and sort of sitting on them while they wrote pieces for me, which got old really soon. And it had the, not problem, but it had the other aspect of ending up with pieces or stories that really weren't my sense of humor, it was somebody else's sense of humor. So one day I just, jumped in and I wrote a piece called Telling Movies. And I played it at the bass convention and immediately was put into 2 anthologies and everybody loved it and people, were like, so I said, well, I must have stumbled on something. So I'm up to about 42 stories at this point. Anyway, so there I was with Bach and funny stories. And I started playing for kids. Kids loved it. The surprising thing, well, it wasn't surprising to me, but I think it's surprising to a lot of people, is that you can play the most serious music there is for kids or anyone. And they immediately grasp it. Unless you get in the way and start saying, well, Bach was born in 1685 and he died in, But if you just say, listen to this, it's going to make you feel different, wonderful. They do. Even little kids. And then if you give them a chance to, relax and laugh, it all works out great. So a few years later, well, about 17 years ago, there's something else. There's something else that happened. It's like during the last 5 or 6 years that I was with Apple Hill, we were touring the Middle East every year. So we went to usually Israel, sometimes into Palestine, other Egypt, sometimes Jordan, Syria, and then also Turkey and Greece, looking for conflict areas, and then Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia. And at that point, most of the old members except me and one other had left the group, and I was allowed to do a story on every program, 10 minutes, which meant I had to write something funny and new every year, which was good. It was good for me. So one day I was playing in Jerusalem at the King David Hotel live on a noon show for Israeli radio. And I happened to be playing, this is early, I happened to be playing a piece by John for me, which I did the text for, B.B. Wolf and Apologia. And beforehand, the hostess said, I need to have the text in advance. And I said, that'll ruin it. None of the jokes will work if they hear them in advance. She said, we have to do this. So she read out the whole text. And then before I went on stage, for a huge audience, there were like 300-400 people there. And she read the text in Hebrew. So I began to play, doing it in English, as I had, always done. Nobody laughed. I mean, it was pin drop silence. And I finished the story and went off stage, and I was like, what happened? And she said, those are all Russians and they don't speak Hebrew or English. So that day I decided I'm never doing that again. And that night I got a friend of mine to translate about maybe a third of the piece into Hebrew, so that it would be, more or less understandable. And I did it the next day. And then before we went to Nazareth, I got a friend of mine in Nazareth to translate into Arabic. And well, it turns out that I have this gift of mimicry. So I've now done, I think, 19 different languages. And if I get it written out in a form that I can read, in other words, we're all the letters are exactly the way they're going to sound, with no Anglicisms or Americanisms or anything, just straight phonetics. And then and if I have a recording, then I can basically do, in any language. So I left Apple Hill. Oh, meanwhile, there's another thing I forgot. While I was at Apple Hill, I was invited by our development director to go play in a women's prison in New Hampshire, where I live. And I said, sure, well, why not? So I went and I played, and it was great. And then she said, I can get you into a couple other prisons. I said, fine, So I did that, and I enjoyed it. I didn't think of it as a career. I just thought, this is fun. So there I was. I'd left Apple Hill. I had Balkan Stories, and didn't have a clue what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And a friend of mine said, go back to prison. So I did. And I did a concert at Concord Men's Prison. And my friend happened to be there. He, got permission to come in. And afterwards he said two things: more Bach, more talking. And immediately I went out and bought the 2 Johnny Cash albums, San Quentin and Folsom, which are great because in the CD version, which wasn't true of the old LPs, you have all of the talking that he does between songs to the inmates. I mean, it's pretty outrageous. And I learned a lot, from how he talked to the audience. So I did. So I played in that prison in New Hampshire. I played in 2 others, I think, local jail. And then through a connection out in California, I got invited to San Quentin, where I actually wrote a separate story that I premiered in there. It was another one of those, like, kind of unfortunate, but I thought, well, I'll just do a takeoff on Johnny Cash singing the song San Quentin, in which he just absolutely derides the prison, and it's the worst place on earth, and it's killing everybody, and pretty dark song. And I pretended I was gonna change it, make it a little lighter, and I did this fake tenor voice, and San Quentin, you're wonderful to me, and stuff like that. And then he comes in, because I manipulated his voice on the speaker, to interrupt me and complain, and eventually convinced me to sing it the way he did. Well, what happened was the day I was playing in San Quentin, there had been a lockdown of all the white inmates. They have this thing in California that seems unbelievable other places, but it's what they do. They separate by race. So the only people that came were African American and Latinos. Well, they separate them too. There's Mexican North, which are born in USA, Mexican South, born in Mexico. So at that time, it was before the movie Johnny Cash had come out, and they enjoyed it. But I talked to the one white guy who was there. He was an assistant to the arts facilitator, and he said, "Well, the problem is I don't think any of them had ever heard of Johnny Cash." But there I was. They liked it, and I got invited to prisons all over California, where I went, happily for several years. Then I was my assistant, Sarah Bacon, made a lucky phone call to the director of corrections in New York, and he said, "That sounds great. Anywhere you want." And then sort of expanded to Connecticut, Vermont, and Maine. Recently, I've been in Michigan, a little bit in Illinois. It's not that easy to get access. They worry about people coming in with radical ideas. They want to know what you're going to say. They want to know, who's sponsoring you, or. But usually it takes finding out who the connection is, and it's not always the person whose job it is to bring in volunteers. Sometimes it is. In the better systems, it is. In some places, it's a volunteer from the outside, or it's even one of the officers, guards. But you need to find out who that is, and then, once you're in, if you are successful, then other things open up. So yeah, playing in prison was unbelievable. I started doing it, and then almost immediately I was visited by Ramzi Redwan, he's now pretty famous. He's a young Palestinian who was caught he was 8 years old, I forget what year that was, throwing a rock at an Israeli tank. And there's something about that picture and the expression on his face that made the picture sort of go worldwide. And he eventually discovered that what he really wanted to do was play music, and he picked the viola, of all things, and came as a student to Apple Hill. Then he got a scholarship to France, where he finished his degree, went back to Palestine, and started a fantastic organization called Al-Kamanjati, which brought free music lessons to kids in refugee camps and in old Ramallah. So he said, "Come, Dobbs, come to Palestine. It'll be great. We'll just go around to the camps and play." And so I did that. And boy, that was a learning experience. The thing that I was learning, during this whole period, but the thing that I learned particularly in Palestine is that if you don't have the kids quiet to start with, you're dead. The music will take care of it as long as they're silent before you start. So I started working with a guy he was my translator. Part of the effect of the story is that if they absolutely know that I don't speak Arabic or whatever language it is, Then when I explain through the interpreter that I'm going to tell a story, and they're kind of puzzled, how's this going to work? And then when I begin in their own language, it's kind of a magical thing. But really, none of it works unless the Bach works. And the way I look at it is that what I'm trying to do every time I play is to give people of whatever age and of whatever condition or however they find themselves a musical experience. It's not like an introduction to classical music or an introduction to anything. It's just you sit there, you listen, and the music makes you feel good or feel something or feel different. So I had this translator, Said, who would, his job was to get the kids quiet. And at that moment in which they were all quiet, then I'd start to play. But I discovered something else kind of soon after that was really interesting. Because you have no control over how the translator speaks. They just translate what you say. But I had control over my own voice. So I would do the prelude to some suite, and then I would say, this music that I'm playing was written 300 years ago. And then they're in Arabic, But the kids are focused not on the words that I'm saying because they don't understand them, but they're focused on how I'm saying them and what kind of voice I'm using. Trying to show, respect for the music and make it mysterious and powerful. And then before the saraband, I always, it's just for kids, but I'll say, this music that I'm playing, I'm about to play, makes me feel something inside. So while you're listening, I want you to notice how it makes you feel. It could be a feeling, a memory, picture of something in your head. And amazing the responses that the kids come up with, I mean, a lot of kids are embarrassed to say, and different nationalities respond differently. It's harder for Afghan kids. They're really embarrassed. Kids in Uganda will just scream out whatever they thought, But I've had some incredible. I was playing in an orphanage in. It was in Palestine, but it's in West Bank, just below a wall. You could look out the window and see the wall, and above that, Israeli settlement, illegal settlement, and it was an orphanage. So none of these kids had families, and I finished the saraband, and little boy, maybe 8, 9 years old, said, I felt like I just came home. So I took it to mean not the orphanage, just to some idea home. But so next year, I'm sitting in my kitchen reading the local newspaper, and there's a picture of a friend of mine just got back from Afghanistan and had been there working with another friend of mine. Turned out that the friend in Afghanistan was doing microfinance, and in fact is one of the world's experts. She no longer works for any particular organization, but she consults all over the world. So I emailed her and said, hey, Joyce, I'd like to come to Afghanistan. She said, yeah, just come. We'll work it out when you get here. And actually, before I left, I saw a reference to Afghan woman speaking at Columbia University. And I wrote to her and said, I'm going to Afghanistan. Do you have any connections I might use to, play concerts? I'd like to play for, kids or schools or universities or, organizations, whatever. And she wrote back and said, get in touch with this, what were they called? Foundation for Cultural and Democratic Solutions or something like that. Anyway, the guy wrote back and said, yeah, please come. We're running a festival in Mazar-e-Sharif. It's the third year in a row. Before, this was in 2006, before 2004, there hadn't been any music in Mazar-e-Sharif since the invasion in the 70s. So it was a pretty big deal. I was there 2 years in a row, and the second year, they had a group from Iran that had 2 women in it, and it was just causing a sensation. Thousands of, there were some women in the audience, but it was mostly men. And when the women came on stage, the men would just scream and scream. But it was wonderful. There was groups from India and Pakistan, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, and me playing Bach. And the interesting part was I was playing the third suite, first year's, third to second year. When it comes to the they all started cheering. They stood up and they're cheering, which is what they do, when an Afghan singer gets into some riff and they love it. Then Iraq was next. I didn't have any connections to Iraq. But one day I'm reading Chamber Music America, which is used to be the Bible of all us chamber musicians, and saw a reference by a woman from Queens to a string workshop held in Iraq for students from all over the country in Erbil. So I got contact information for her, and I talked to her on the phone. She's still in Iraq, and she said, call Paul. He's now the conductor of the National Youth Orchestra. So I did. I called Paul and I said, I want to come to Iraq. He said, great. Well, I made the mistake, or not, of saying, I'll come for free. So he immediately said yes. Turned out they had quite a bit of money, but I was just glad to get there. And the next year they paid me, so it all worked out. But that was an incredible organization. It was, I'm not the only one who says this, but it was what we had all hoped for from Iraq after the war. There were Arabs from Baghdad, both Sunni and Shia. There were Kurds. There may have been a Christian, I don't know. But it was all mixed together. They were between, 16 and 27, I think. Most of them had never had an international type teacher. They either started on their own or with a teacher from a local teacher. One bass player was quite experienced and a wonderful player and a fabulous person. And he's sitting right there. Yeah. Nice to see you, Amr. And the other was Chia, who he'd been playing bass for 2 months. And his teacher had applied for the youth orchestra and didn't get in, which tells you the level that his teacher was at and the talent level that Chia had, even though he didn't know how to hold the bow. He didn't know he didn't know nothing. And he couldn't read music, but somehow he played something and Paul, was convinced by him. So I started working with him like 3 or 4 hours a day. And he was this music student that we all dream of, hardly ever find who did whatever I said. So by the end of 2 weeks, with help from Samir, because Samir would nod his head when the bass players came in, just the two of them. And then Chia had practiced each passage the way I explained he had to practice 3 times through without making a mistake. If you make a mistake, you go back, you do it even slower. And, he would do that stuff. I caught him in the practice room doing that. This is amazing. Nobody does this, not even me. So at the end of 2 weeks, he played the Beethoven first, and I said, just leave out the passage in the last movement. But he'd been practicing it over and over and over and over. And I look up and he's like flying through it. Anyway, so I left him for a year and came back to Iraq to the orchestra. And during the 12 months I'd been gone, he'd done everything I said. And he was a completely different player. I just heard his graduate recital. Ironically, one of my friends in Israel, an Israeli, helped find a school for him. I wanted him to come to the States and I just could not work it out. So he ended up going to Trieste and just got his bachelor and he's going to start his master's, I guess already started. Anyway, I had told Paul and I told all the students there, what I really want to do is to come back at a different time. Not that it isn't wonderful working with the youth orchestra and do concerts. And I formed a committee. Samir in Baghdad. We had somebody in Erbil, somebody in Soleimani, somebody in Rania. And I came back the next year with support from the US Embassy in Baghdad. And I did like 3 weeks of concerts in all over the country. It's fantastic. And I've been going back ever since. I never got support from the US Embassy. I think we've cut all support to every embassy in the world. And boy, I used to be able to travel, with USAID and USIS, that's what it was. I was supposed to go to Iraq in March, and I heard back from my friends in Soleimani that schools were closing. But maybe I could come a month later, when we thought it was going to take 30 days. I'd just gotten home from Afghanistan, and luckily, or I'd still be sitting there. I had a wonderful trip to Afghanistan. I did something that I'd never done before. I couldn't find an organization that would host me. Everybody's downsizing, and but I had some contacts, and I contacted a guy who used to be the director of the Afghans for Tomorrow School, which was a really wonderful institution. It was fundraised here in the States, but all the teachers and the administrator were all Afghans. The students were all, and at the beginning, the students were all girls. And the idea of the school was the girls who were now able to go to school, who hadn't been able to, would be in accelerated courses so they could learn to read and write. So you had, girls 9 and 10 who were in first grade, but it was, a special first grade. So anyway, I contacted him and I said, I'm just looking for some help. Maybe you could find a driver and blah, blah, blah. And he stepped up. He found me a half-price hotel. A young kid driver. He gave me his son to be my translator, who was on vacation, for free. Ended up having it. And then I had a Facebook friend, Asita Ferdous, who was a woman I met on Facebook, who was head of gender for the Kabul municipality. And an incredible person and incredible work that she does. And so between the two of them plus the son and my own contacts, I had more concerts than I've ever had. Plus playing on TV for like 15 million people. The next country was Uganda, and that was through a board member who has worked in corrections in California his whole life. In fact, he keeps trying to retire and he just can't seem to manage it. But he had a friend who was a missionary in Uganda. California woman is kind of funny. She's 6'4" and blonde from California. And she helped found and works with, but does not direct, an organization called Dwelling Places that rescues kids off the streets. Huge problem with homeless street kids, basically street kids in Uganda, because there were 2 million AIDS orphans. And there's poverty, especially in the north, and families will send kids out to make money by begging on the streets. Anyway, this organization would rescue them, give them clothes, place them. They even got the law changed to allow them to place children not with their parents, with other relatives if the parents are abusive. So great organization. And so at some point during that trip, which I played entirely for kids. I mean, just we went to all the schools where they're at. We went to drop-in centers, was, prisons just for kids. I mean, we did everything. I said, what I really like is playing in prison. So that year, at some point, she went to the director of corrections of Uganda and said, this man's music heals broken hearts. And he said, well, in that case, go for it. So the next year I had access to, I think it was 6 different prisons, including death row. I discovered after the concert at death row that they actually haven't executed anyone in 30 years, and they're phasing it out. But that was fantastic. I found myself one time, I was in prison in Jeri, which is a few hours out of town, and the warden was meeting with me and said, well, we have 1,000 inmates. And I said, I can't play for 1,000 inmates. And he said, but I'm willing to play several concerts. Can you put them in the biggest room that you have? I said, we have no rooms. And I was going to say, look, there are limits. I'm flexible, but playing outside for 1,000 men. But he kept begging. He said, come and look, come and look. Well, it turned out there was a raised concrete platform and a little roof over it. So there was a little bit of projection. And what you may or may not know about Africans is that they have no personal space, none whatsoever. So he kept saying, come closer, come closer, come closer, come closer. And they basically are, there's this clump of people, 1,000 men in this pretty small area. So they were able to hear, and when I started with the story, Awo Olwatuka, I mean, they stood up and they cheered for, it was minutes, I couldn't continue. But they listened really well to the Bach. Anyway, I have the best job in the world, and I've never been more satisfied with the playing that I'm doing. Something that people often misunderstand is that, well, it's really great that you do that. No, I mean, it is. And I understand that it's great, and I understand that it really helps people. But if it were a question of, me getting up and everybody hating it, or people saying, "Well, I don't know, I don't get it." Or, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't last 10 minutes. I mean, I've had in the 17 years, I had one concert that didn't work, and it was in a jail in no, it was a prison in Queens, and they had put a tarp over the floor, cut out all the sound. Half of the inmates didn't speak English, which I didn't know, or I could have dealt with that. And then they served them lunch. So I couldn't be heard over the roar. But that's one in we figure it's 1,100, close to 1,200 concerts. So that's not an issue. I mean, I look forward to going, especially to prisons. I mean, there's nothing more fun than connecting with people who, I like to say it's like they're like glasses, and you fill them with water. They don't know what they need until you've given it to them. And it's that thing that Bach does, but it's not only Bach. I'd done a couple tours with other people, and I did a bunch of New York prisons with a pianist playing keyboard, Shostakovich cello sonata, which is a really dark. I mean, like all Shostakovich, it's dark and dramatic, and I tried to prepare him. I said, this will move you, but it's I told a little bit about him being oppressed. I don't like to do historical stuff, but a little bit about Stalin. And I remember this was at a pretty big, it was a huge audience. It was like 250 men in a gym sitting on bleachers, which again, you wouldn't think you could be able to do, without amplification. And I never use amplification. And those men listen, incredible silence and respect. But they're filing by on the way out. And one guy who's an African American, he whispers in my ear, says, "I'm still trembling." So, we don't get that in we used to play in the Peterborough Town Hall, and the women were like, "Oh, that was wonderful." But, if you want to touch somebody, you got to go where the people are. And I'll tell you, I mean, I could go on forever, but I'll tell you one more. This was a really good one. Playing in Bedford Hills prison just outside of New York. And it was a women's prison for women inmates who had behaved well enough to earn their way into this program. It was the last 2 or 3 years of their sentence. And they were in this really nice prison that had gardens and flower gardens, and they were allowed to go out and work every day, which they want to do. I mean, they're road cleanup or whatever it is. I mean, they're dying to get out of the physical prison. So it's always, I mean, it's that place closed now, which is, the good thing about New York is they're closing prisons because the population is going down. That's a really good thing. But I loved playing at that place. There are a couple of stories that I do that have songs at the end, and primarily, like most prisons. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. Primarily African American. These were African American women. Women are always, looser than men inmates. So I'd be like one phrase into the song, and they'd stand up and start singing along and dancing. Yeah, I played there one night. I think it was the last time I played there. And after I finished, I usually end with this lullaby that I wrote for my son. So wrote it in Afghanistan, so it's in Afghan, and I mean in Pashto and also English, but it's you know, it's a lullaby. So I had done this, I'd done Bach, I'd done story, I finished with the lullaby, and one of the officers, a woman, came up to me and said, "I'm supposed to tell you from a particular inmate how much she enjoyed it, and she couldn't be here because she's too broken up." And she said that while she was listening, she began to cry, and that she hadn't cried the whole time she'd been in prison for the fact that she'd been in prison. And while she was there, her partner had died, and she'd never cried for her partner. So she was outside crying and couldn't thank me in person. It's just, you know, it's the power of music. You know, it unlocks something. And I'll just say a couple things. One is, any of you want to go to prison, if you can work it out, do it. But don't make the mistake that I get so angry when I hear of you know, youth concerts, and they're playing, oh, we're playing an arrangement of Star Wars. I mean, come on, you know. You play the most serious thing you've got, you know, and trust that these are humans you're playing for, even if they're small humans, or if they're inmates, that they will respond because the music will force them to respond. And yeah, and the other thing is, you have to know how to talk to them. You know, I mean, this is less true for kids, because I don't usually even talk to kids before I start playing. I just let them look at the instrument, be curious. I don't want to tell them what's going to happen. You know, I just start playing. But for other audiences, I mean, especially audiences, particularly audiences that have never heard anything like that, never heard Bach, or wouldn't know if they had, I want to make sure that they're ready to listen. So I say, and you know, there's what they in prison they call it realness. But if you're not real, that doesn't mean anything special. Just being you, you know, exactly who you are, talking to the people there who are actually just people. They're not criminals or, you know, inmates, and they're just people. And so you can hear some music, it's going to affect how you feel. It goes right inside you, changes what you're thinking, what you're feeling. And I go on like that for a while, and I say, and you don't have to do anything. The music does all the work. You just sit there. The more receptive you are, the bigger the experience. And you can sort of see him leaning forward, wanting to be receptive. You know, everybody wants to have the experience. So you can watch my fingers. You can let your mind drift off. You can go home. You can fall asleep. The music will still be affecting you. And you don't need to try to figure it out. I've been playing these same 6 pieces 40 years, and I haven't figured them out yet. And I don't know what that would mean. It's just, I love them. They make me feel good. So then obviously, how can you fail with that? All you have to do is be open and do nothing. So, and it's something, you know, you need to practice. But the bottom line is, if you do it with realness, you know, it'll work. And I know I had friends with string quartet who wanted to, thinking about playing in Folsom Prison. I said, you should do it. God, they will absolutely go nuts. They love it. But, you know, two of the people weren't comfortable, and so they never did. So here I am. I'm doing something that is uniquely mine. I mean, not everybody can mimic stories in foreign languages. I get that. I mean, I'm lucky. It's not hard for me. I can't really take credit for it. I just use it. I write funny pieces for myself, and I love doing that. And turns out people like them. And I think Bach and his music has a way of penetrating anything, and it needs absolutely no preparation or introduction. Another thing I often think about the first time you ever heard a piece of classical music. I mean, I hope it wasn't one was like, oh, that's boring, I hate it. And I'm not talking about on the radio, because it sounds boring on radio, But no, a piece of live music that moved you, maybe made you want to be a musician. You didn't have to practice listening to it. I mean, you listen to it, and there it was. So all of you have your own, unique talents, and there are ways. If you're a musician, if you're not, there are other ways. But if you're a musician, there are ways to use that have nothing to do with traveling by train from city to city in Poland and putting candelabras on your piano. I mean, none of that. Anybody got any questions?
Thanks, Dobbs. I just knew that it would be really amazing for everybody to hear this. And the thing that really strikes me the most about what you do and what you've been saying is that I think we're, as classical musicians, sort of kind of conditioned to apologize, and explain like, oh, this won't hurt that much, but here, like, maybe it's okay. But actually, what you said about remembering the first time that you heard, because everybody who's a musician had that experience, so I just, thanks for sharing that. I think we don't need to apologize, and we don't need to package it, and we don't need to worry what people are going to think, because the music speaks for itself. So Maggie had a question. So how do we go about contacting prisons to play for them? We try and contact the warden.
Well, like I say, it's a little bit difficult, and I did it I mean, it's worked for me in different ways. But I think the first thing is just write a proposal and try to find out who's in charge of volunteers, because the easiest way, I mean, even if you do it a different way, you end up being a volunteer. So they have programs for volunteers in every jail, every prison. And you need to find out who that person is. Hopefully, talk to them in person or send a proposal. Don't expect any money. I mean, there are some ways of getting money from this. There's a foundation in California that recently has been giving me a little bit of money. And there are grants. In New Hampshire, State Arts Council has funded me in jails and prisons in New Hampshire for the last 6 or 7 years. So I got a grant from Yale one time. It's something that people do like to fund, but prisons have no money. So, but if you're, and then something that happened to me in Michigan, I had one contact, and that person was a woman at a local prison, and she had me play there. And week after that, I got calls from like 4 or 5 other prisons. I mean, I was meanwhile gone, but I've come back. So there was some kind of an audition, whatever, that as soon as they think that you're okay, then But yeah, if you just pick a prison, pick a jail, and find out who's head of volunteers, jails are probably easier. And then come up with a program, and front load it with the most serious stuff you have.
So I just wanted everybody to know about your podcasts that you're doing now. So all of the stories that you've been doing now, you've been recording them and putting them out. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, yeah, it's just kind of the COVID-19 thing. I thought, I can't be out playing. I don't know when I'll get out playing. I mean, none of us do. But I have all these stories recorded because I only have one that's written down. So I mean, I have sketches for the others, but nothing that anybody could ever, interpret, but other than me. And sometimes I forget. But anyway, so I've been recording them over the years, and I have 4 CDs full, which you can get through my website, and I have a bunch that never got put on CDs, and a bunch that I'm writing. I just finished one I really really like. It's called Hillary and the Glass Slipper. I mean, ceiling. I mean, actually, it was the other way around, but it doesn't matter. It works either way. And so it's called Stories by Dobbs, and it's on iTunes, Google Play, Stories by Dobbs, Dobbs, or our website, bachwithverse.org.
And I just posted in the chat the website address for that. So Dobbs's nonprofit that he works with is bachwithverse.org. And you can also make a donation there to help him keep doing this, and subscribe to his podcasts on Apple Podcasts or Google Play or through his website. Anybody else have any questions before we wrap up? Yeah. Well, thanks. It's been really great catching up with you. Like I said to everybody, we go way back, like a long, 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 long time ago. And you know, I've always felt a really strong connection to you and really appreciated everything that you gave me. Um, so it's great to reconnect and to share you with everybody. So thank you so much. Thanks for everybody for coming. Do check out Dobbs' podcasts and his website, bachwithverse.org. And we hope to see you back on Thursday for our season finale. I posted a link to that in the chat as well. So thanks, Dobbs.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.